All right. Okay, welcome to Knit University. This is a 4-week class that we are teaching on a variety of topics that from fibers to gauge to Ravelry to even finishing your knits. So today is our first Knit University, and we're going to be covering fiber types, and then the weights and fiber that you might find in your local yarn shop. So today, Valerie is going to be teaching us about the types of yarn. So Valerie, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, types of yarn, types of fibers that go into our yarn. Basically, there are two different categories. You have your natural fibers, and then you have your synthetics. So the majority of the yarn that we have in the shop are natural fibers. We have your 100% fiber, like 100% wool, and we also have a lot of blends. And through this, you'll see why we have blends, because some fibers are not able to really hold up and hold their shape actually on their own. So the first one, let's talk about wool. Two different kinds of processes to make wool yarn. There's the woolen spun, and there is a worsted spun, but in the US we call it twist, a twisted spun. The woolen spun, basically you have your wool fibers and they are just spun as is. They're allowed to go into the spinner any which way they want to go. And then they are twisted. Yes, I'm trying to think about this. Yeah, they're twisted on their own. And then with the worsted spun or the twisted, the fibers they're held flat. They're laid flat parallel to each other. And then they're put through the spinner. And then after the spinner, then they are twisted mechanically on purpose. So we have woolen spun and we have twisted. Also with wool, you have superwash. And if you look through a microscope at wool fibers, there are scales. They lay like shingles on a roof. And with superwash, the scales are either removed or they're suppressed through a process, and that allows the garment, your project, to be washed and dried without fear of it shrinking or felting. So that's wool. There is, what was I going to say? Oh, one thing that I find very interesting is wool has the ability, it absorbs 1/3 of its weight of water before it actually feels wet to the touch. So wool is very, very soft or very, very warm, and it's airy, especially with the woolen spun. The woolen spun technique gives it the big, airy, lofty feel. And Angie, do you have those two skeins of Brooklyn tweed?
I do.
Brooklyn tweed is a perfect example. Woolen spun is the shelter, and that's the shelter that Angie's holding right now. And you can see it's, you know, it's bumpy, it's very natural. That is a woolen spun yarn. And then Brooklyn tweed Puri is the worsted spun or the twisted spun. And you can see it's very smooth, very compact. So those are the two big examples, I think, especially from one yarn company, as to woolen spun and then the twisted or the worsted spun yarn, based on how you want your project to look. So then with wool, you have the merino wool, which is probably the softest wool. And Angie, did you say that merino was from the tummy, from the belly?
Well, it can be from different parts of the sheep, but the finest merino.
The finest merino.
Some labels will say finest merino, and that is close to the underbelly of the merino sheep.
All right.
So could be the quality of the merino.
All right, good. Good to know. So we have mohair. Let's move on from wool. We have mohair, which comes from the Angora goat. And it's extremely lightweight, and it's warm, and it's soft. It shares many of the properties of wool, but it's not as resilient. And so the majority of the time, mohair is blended with wool. Do we have a mohair blend sample?
We do.
Wonderful.
Favorite, which is Silk Cloud.
Oh,
Let
yes.
me get a finger of that out for you.
There it is. What is the blend of that Silk Cloud?
It is 60 kid mohair and 40 silk.
Okay.
So Rowan has a mohair as well, and I think it's 70-30. And I think that's why we often gravitate towards the Silk Cloud, because it has more silk in it. And the little thread, which I know you're going to talk about silk, that runs through that is where the mohair is attached.
Yeah. And kid mohair is just like what it sounds. It's from the baby goats.
Oh.
I found that out. So let's just go ahead and talk about silk, since Angie has that up. Silk comes from the cocoon of the silkworm, and they basically, dismantle these cocoons and separate the untwine this filament, which can be up to 600, 800 yards long in one cocoon, which is totally amazing. But silk is considered a natural animal fiber because of the silkworm. And it's used for its strength and its sheen, and just like what Angie has there, it's used to blend with others to make it stronger. All right, cashmere. Cashmere comes from the goat, cashmere goats from China and Tibet. Sorry, you just caught my eye there. Cashmere is very luxurious. It comes from the belly of cashmere goats. Most of the time it is blended as well, because it is expensive and it can be weaker than wool. So it may not hold up. Do we have any cashmere? Is that cashmere that we have from Rowan? Is that pure cashmere? Angie? She's frozen. I'm pretty sure it is. I will answer my own question. It is pure cashmere, the one that we have in the shop. Then we have alpaca, which super soft, comes from the alpaca animal. It is blended pretty much all of the time because alpaca is very stretchy. It will not hold its shape. It will get larger and stretch out on you. So there are times you can use alpaca in something that isn't going to be very fitted, like if you just want a light shawl or a light wrap. But sweaters for sure, or anything like that, you definitely need to have it blended with something. Angie, what do you have for alpaca?
I have Sima from Shibui, and this has super baby alpaca.
Ooh.
So I would bet that it does come from a baby alpaca, and then 30% fine merino.
Very nice. Shibui has pretty much every fiber known to man. And what was I going to say about alpaca? Oh, they're brushed. They are not sheared. Alpacas are. And then we have, what else do we have? We talked about silk. We have Angora, which comes from rabbits. And do we still have Angora in the shop? We do.
We do. Yeah, we still have that.
Yeah. So they are brushed. Typically you have it blended with something else, because an Angora fiber is very, very short. And so it needs to be with something to kind of hold it all together. It does shed. So that's something to take into consideration when you use Angora.
Valerie, we do have this Beatrice, which is a new yarn from Juniper Moon, and it does have 30% Angora. So if you want just a little bit of Angora, this would be a nice, it's super soft. I have a project that I'll show on Monday with it, but it's got the merino wool and Angora. So that
Angora.
combination.
And you can see how it's pretty fuzzy. So that's probably from those short fibers from the Angora, I would think.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about animal fibers? I don't see any hands raised. Okay, we'll continue. Let's talk about plant fibers. So cotton, number one plant fiber that we use. All cotton is non-allergenic, so we don't have to worry about allergies. It absorbs moisture quickly and it dries very quickly. Let's see, it's not as elastic as wool. So it's a little bit harder to block out if you need to make it bigger, because it probably won't do that because it does not stretch very well. Angie, what do we have for cotton in the shop?
Well, the nav and then the bud. So the little hearts that I showed this week are made out of 100% cotton, and nav is 100%. And then all of our lines have a cotton. So
yeah, very nice. And so then after cotton, then you've got the linen, and the linen comes from the flax plant, from the stem of the flax plant. Linen, I know we have a Rowan linen. Is it 100% linen? That Rowan that we have?
No, that creative linen. I'd have to look.
Okay, because 100% linen, it can be very stiff. It does soften up over time as you wear it, as you wash it, it will soften up. But to begin with, linen is very, very stiff, very lightweight, makes wonderful spring and summer sweaters. And I have a sweater made out of linen actually, and I do love it. Then we have, do we have any bamboo in the shop? We don't have any bamboo.
No, we don't.
Bamboo is a biosynthetic fiber. It is which means it comes both natural and synthetic. Bamboo, of course, is the natural plant, but it needs to be processed with a chemical, with a synthetic, so that it can be usable, so they can make a fiber out of it. So it's called a biosynthetic. And
I think what's interesting about that, Valerie, is I have folks come in wanting bamboo because it's a natural plant fiber. And so you're telling me that that's not really true.
It isn't.
I mean, because it has to be treated to get to where we can't just knit a bamboo stick. Right. Okay. Interesting.
You can't make a yarn out of just 100% bamboo. There's no way. It's got to be processed.
Okay.
So that we, with a chemical or treated somehow so that it can become a fiber that we can use. So, and then that brings us to our synthetic fibers: acrylic, nylon. Sue Wilkins has something. Let's see what Sue says.
This is back to wool, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, do you want me just to say it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I noticed when I was making a hat out of big sexy wool versus the rasta, it was very loosely like twisted. Is that the difference in the way they're spun?
It could very well be.
You know what I mean? Like it was.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. The rasta is definitely more airy.
More woolen spun.
It's woolen spun. Yeah, and the big sexy wool is more than likely than the twisted spun.
That's what I
twisted after the fact.
When you get up in those bulkies, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that almost could be roving, and a roving is not spun at all.
That's what it kind of felt like it was just loose. Sort of, not the right word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Absolutely. You bet. You bet. Thank you, Sue. Okay. What are we talking? We're talking about nylons and acrylics. So nylons, They were basically invented for their strength, and they are added to yarns to fibers to make them strong. Especially, we all know, those of us who knit socks, you've got to have some nylon in your wool so that your sock will hold up. Acrylic is basically the same thing, except acrylic is bigger. It's bulkier, it's fluffier. We have some acrylics in the shop, especially for babies, because, you know, moms are wanting these things that they can wash and be pretty heavy duty for their little ones. And so we have acrylics for that. But most of the yarns we have in the shop are natural fibers, whether they're 100% natural fiber or whether they're a blend of others. So, do you want to add anything, Angie?
Well, and your acrylics and nylon and polyester, they're all chemically made, correct?
They are. They are. Actually, I read in here, nylon was invented by DuPont, the chemical company. That's where the nylon was first invented. So that gives you an idea of that, of where that's come from. So, yeah.
Okay, very good. Questions about fibers or things that you've run? Good. Oh, Sandra's got a question.
Sandra has one.
I was wondering, what would be the reason for wanting bamboo? What are the benefits of it?
I think people, it's the feel and the texture that they're looking for more than anything. I do think that you know, especially nowadays, we're all thinking about organic and, you know, being healthy and living clean, and bamboo has, I think, been given some of that, but we do need to be aware of how it is made. So, but you know, the 100% organic bamboo, the bamboo part of it is probably 100% organic, but the process of it is not.
Right.
So.
Valerie?
Yes.
I have done some socks out of bamboo, a bamboo blend. They do not wear like your wool blend socks do. You know, I had beautiful color. I loved them. But after about 3-4 wearings, I would get holes and wear marks, and they just don't hold up.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. I know Angie doesn't carry it in the shop, and she really doesn't. You know, since I've been there, I haven't seen any inclination for her to start carrying it either. So, and that may be why it's just not a very strong fiber. Yes, Connie, I see you waving. I see your
Well,
hand.
I have a couple things. One is bamboo is very sustainable.
Right.
So, I mean, it grows really, really fast in forests, and it's, you know, occasionally we find it around here as a landscape plant. And my only advice there is be very careful, because it can be very invasive. Like bamboo forests in certain parts of the world, I mean, like grow like crazy. So it is a sustainable fiber for that portion of the fiber. So that's one reason. I also understand that it is antibacterial. So they will weave like sheets and things that are supposed to be more air circulating kind of thing, you know, body regulating kind of thing. So sometimes that might be an advantage, though. I find that interesting. I wonder what they do to make the sheets more durable, since it sounds like it could be a fiber problem. And then my other question, the question I had was, what exactly is mercerized cotton? That's a term I often see when we're talking about cotton. What does that mean?
You know what? I saw something in here about that, but I didn't go into it. It is, it makes the cotton stronger. It says that it is treated with a caustic soda and then it's stretched. And then that makes the cotton stronger and more durable and more lustrous too. So that's probably, because I have seen mercerized cotton sheets actually, and that may be where the lustrous part of that sheet comes from. But yeah, good question, Connie.
Okay, I'm back. Thanks. Joyce has a question. Do you have tips or tricks for determining what fiber an unlabeled stash yarn might be?
Oh.
Yeah, I want
Well,
to too.
you can get a book that has things like this on it. I don't know. Or come into the shop, you know, and we can start looking around the shop and see what it looks like the most. Yeah.
I about lighting it on fire.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right?
right.
Has anybody heard about that?
Wool won't
Like an
burn.
acrylic would melt, right? If it's a
Right.
Right.
An acrylic, any synthetic is going to melt.
Right. And wool won't burn. That's right. Now we're going to talk about
usually it's between, is this an actual wool or is this some acrylic? And I end up just rubbing it on my lip to see whether it makes me angry or not.
we are going to talk about how you can determine weight. Now that's an easy one. We can determine the weight of an unknown labeled yarn, but that's a great question. Joyce.
That is a good question.
Any others about fibers? Oh,
I think we're good.
okay, great. Now it's my turn to talk to you about yarn weights. And we're going to go to a website that I think you would all find to be very valuable. So I'm going to do a screen share here and we'll go to where that is, hopefully. And this website is not the Zoom. Get to it. It's the Craft Yarn Council. So you might write this down. This has got a wealth of information in it. And like it could be a place where someone that wanted to learn to knit could come. Of course, we about knit versus crochet, learn to videos. It's got the knit stitch, the purl stitch, learn to crochet. It's also got the standards. And so we're going to talk a little bit about standards today. And unfortunately, it would be lovely if the whole industry did follow the standards, but they don't follow the standards because there are as much as we would like, because there are so many yarn manufacturers out there. But we will take a look at that chart. It's got abbreviations. So if you needed to come and look, let's look here at knitting abbreviations. You can click here and it will, you could look up any abbreviation that you might not know. Now you can go and Google that, and that often works as well. But I just think this is a really nice website. The other thing I like about this is, let's see what it clicks off. Here we go. Standard body measurements and sizing. So it shows how to do your measurements. So like if you're interested in measuring for a sweater, this would be the guidelines. Lots of times when we're getting to do our guidelines, we don't know where to do that. There's also the standards for socks. So there's a foot size chart here. So there's for baby, youth, women, men's. Just a really nice information about, so I'm going to go to standard yarn weight system. So this you will often see. We have this printed off at the shop. You could print it off yourself if you'd like to be able to look at that. When we talk about weight, we're talking about the thickness of the yarn. So there is some confusion about thinking about, well, my yarn weighs 50 grams or my yarn weighs 100 grams. That doesn't necessarily indicate the thickness of your yarn. And so the standard yarn weight system your yarns will have these little, I guess they're little skeins with the numbers on them. And that will identify what type of yarn it is. So we can look at lace, super fine, fine. And that would be then called fingering. It talks about how we might refer to these. We don't really call it baby. We don't call fine baby either. So the problem that occurs with yarn weights or yarn thickness is the standards in Europe are different than the standards in America. And in fact, American designers British written pattern might be. So with us being a Rowan flagship store, we have a lot of British wool and British products from the UK, and we love them. I mean, they've been doing knitting and yarn for a very little bit of translation that sometimes doesn't come across the pond, so to speak, to America. The thing that you'll want to pay attention to is what your gauge is. So this will often determine yarn might be. So you can see it's 33 to 40, and important to look at is that your gauge is done in stockinette in a 4-inch swatch. So it's not done in garter, it's not done in pattern, it's not done in anything like that. It is done in stockinette. Okay, so that's important for us to remember as we think about gauge. And next week, Susan's going to be teaching about gauge. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute as it refers to the yarn. So we come on down 27 to 32, 23 to 26, 21 to 24. So we'll often look at your pattern, and then we'll say, well, what kind of yarn are they calling for? Then there are recommended needle sizes as well. So you can see that they've got the metric and they've got the US. And interesting enough, many of us will work with our patterns in yardage, yet everything that we don't work in ounces, we work in grams. So we're kind of we often will refer to as well. So let's see, I told you about the American manufacturer. So this is a great sheet. You could even print it off. I'm going to take you to another screen share. Question. You check while I switch screens here, please. Val, can you check? Can you see the chat? There we go.
I missed most of that because you're breaking up.
Yeah, sorry.
But there are no questions.
Okay.
Everybody's following. Oh, Connie. Oh, I can't. Oh, she does have her hand up. I can't see everybody. Okay. Now it's down.
Okay. Man, that was an old hand. All right. That's okay. We're good. All right. I want to show you a yarn label. And so we can talk about, and then I'm going to talk about wraps per inch as well. So let's get this going. And we'll talk a little bit about substituting yarn too. Okay, here is a yarn label. If I freeze up, just ask me to repeat it.
Okay.
Okay, so some yarn labels have a wealth of information and some yarn labels don't. And that's where wraps per inch might come in handy. Up here, we talk about color and dye lot. What we know is that a dye lot is important, especially if you're making a large project, that you would want it all to match. There are some tricks that we can do to blend in a dye lot. And sometimes even a dye lot doesn't indicate that it's all going to look the same. That's why the companies we carry here at Knit Paper Scissors, we pay close attention to their reputation, how they put their things together, what they're about, because that does make a difference then when we're You see that it says featuring the finest Angora and extra fine merino wool. It's 54%, 30%, and then 16% nylon. So this has become a really popular yarn recently, and they're called a chainette. And the chainette, you can't see it, I think, Val, because your Angora is the fuzziness, but it's like a nylon tube, and then they blow the fibers into that nylon tube. So this Beatrice is like this. What's the Rowan one? Rush fleece, same thing. And that's where the nylon is coming, but it is going to give it quite a bit of strength. So this is good with the Angora and the wool to be able, you know, to be able to have that. Then we come on down and we're going to look at, you'll see that this has got both 1.76 ounces, but 50 grams. So that's what we really look for. And then we see that there's 109 or 109. What we know is that yards is about 10% more than meters. And that's kind of true here. So we're seeing it's about 9 more yards. So whenever somebody comes in and they have a pattern and it says, well, when I need 70 meters, then we know we're going to need about 77 yards kind of thing. So it's always 10% more. Here are the wash symbols. And back on the Yarn Craft Council, there's a great little handout that you could print out that has got the different symbols. Now we see that this is bulky. Okay, and so if we look back, I'm going to look back on our bulky here. Look back on our bulky, we should have a gauge of 12 to 15 stitches. So let's look. They have 12 to 15 stitches. So this is a pretty good example of a standardized label. They're suggesting the US needle size 9 to 11, and then they have hooks as well as recommended. And remember, this is over stockinette stitch. So this, the Craft Council or our standardized companies would. Here's a Shibui label. So it's going to be a lot different in that it's got the content. We see the color, the dye lot, they've got a weight, and then they've got the gauge of 20 stitches. So here's a great example. This, they're calling the weight of Shibui as lace. When I look at the lace in the standardized chart, the gauge on that is 33 stitches. So therefore, we're back to where a gauge swatch is important. Now, this is saying, though, 20 stitches on a US 7. So that's where our difference is, because a lace weight would typically be done on a 00, a 0, or a 1, and then your gauge would be 33. So see, Shibui is saying we like to knit this on a 7 at a 20 stitch gauge. Okay, so you have to be a little bit of a detective here on your labels. Let's look at, let's say you have a product that you do not know what the label's gone and you just don't know. We have this little tool, and you could just use a ruler. That would be okay too. This is wraps per inch. And what you would do is you would take your yarn, and then you would you don't want to pull it tight like that. You just are going to let it naturally fall. So I'm going to scooch this down. We're going to wrap it in this way. And we're going to see how many wraps per inch, just letting it butt up to each other gently. And so it's about 4-5 inches. And this is Rowan Big Wool, and it's considered bulky. And our stitches is 12 to 15 per inch. So we're right on with our right on, almost a little thinner than like your raw. Going to be a little bulkier. They're still both considered bulky, but they're completely different yarns. So a little wraps per inch is a valuable. The very best thing to do is to knit a swatch. Oop, I'm froze. Am I not froze now? Okay.
You're okay. But
All right.
were you, we missed the one part. Were you, did you mention Rasta
Yes.
after that? Okay.
Yeah,
All
Rasta is considered bulky, just like big wool is considered bulky,
Mhm.
but it is definitely a heavier bulky than the big wool is. Say about Santa Cruz, that's considered a worsted weight yarn, and so is Blue Sky wool stock. But if you were to do the wraps per inch, you would notice that your Santa Cruz is going to be heavy and not as many wraps per inch as your wool stock is going to be. So one of the things that often happens is folks come in and they say, I have this pattern and I don't know what yarn to make it out of. And so one of the places that what I like to do with a customer is say, what is it about the pattern you like? Do you like the color? Because sometimes we see the picture and we say, I want a pink yarn. I want it just like that. Do you like the drape of the picture? Because we can't necessarily substitute all yarns across the board. If you want a drape, like let's say, as Valerie taught about cotton to wool, they're going to look completely different in the finished product. So there's a number of things you need to think about instead of just saying, well, I want to use this yarn. So yarn substitution is best done with a swatch. So next week, again, Susan's going to be teaching on swatches, and swatches aren't just for sweaters. So they're a great way for you to determine what your yarn thickness or weight is. For example, we could have a 50-gram ball and it could have 160 yards on it. So let's just say this one has 160 yards on it. And then I have another one. I don't have that with me as I did the other night. And the same 50-gram ball of a different yarn has 120 yards. That means that that one will be slightly thicker. Okay. So just because they say it's a 50-gram ball, that you think, well, that's going to have the right yardage. Not necessarily. That yarn could be a little thinner. That yarn could be a little thicker. That's why a gauge swatch is so critical to helping determine your thickness. Just like we looked on the Shibui, where it said on a 7, 20 stitches. Many of us knit weight yarn. So fingering would be like our sock yarn or lazy bee yarn or La Jolla yarn. And if we were knitting that to gauge, we would maybe use a 0, a 1, maybe a 00. But a lot of shawls are knit with a size 4 needle. And that gives you a looser lay to the fabric, so to speak. So fabric is important. Fabric is important in your desire and what you want to achieve. All right, questions, comments, things you've run into.
Connie has a question.
Okay.
I'll read it.
Mm-hmm.
So she said, so you're saying that the thickness is range. Yes.
So the thickness, and if you look at the yarn weight system, they'll say worsted weight. So Val, you were talking earlier about worsted spun. Mm-hmm. That gets a little confusing for us in America.
It does. Yeah. That's why we call it twisted.
Yes, there we go. So the worsted gauge is anywhere from 16 to 20. Okay. So for example, our Santa Cruz might knit at 16, our wool stock might knit at 20, because it's all more on the light end of a worsted weight. Good question. And see, I used weight interchangeably, but it is kind of more the thickness of the yarn. All right, what other? Have any of you run into any challenges that you'd like us to share and how you worked it out? Not yet, you're all experts. All right, well, I'm going to encourage you to make sure to join us next week for the gauge, because that really fits right in with determining the correct weight of yarn and how that might impact. It'll either be on Monday at 7 or this time on the following Thursday. Then the next week is Ravelry, and we will be teaching Ravelry. And then the fourth week we'll be teaching caring for your knits, how to finish your knits, blocking, and caring for them as well. So this has been fabulous. Thank you, Val.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That was a lot of information.
Good, good. Well, we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel. Kind of gives us a thumbs up. Thanks. We'll be posting this on our YouTube channel for you to be able to go back and refer to. So we appreciate your help with us and all for being on. Oh, lots of thumbs up. Hey, we've got good. That's fun. Everybody's giving us a thumbs up. Do they need?
We've learned what this bar is down here.
I know, and we're getting claps. No, there isn't a thumbs down, so I guess they have to give us a thumbs up, right, Val?
That's right. There's nothing sad or upsetting about our emojis.
All right. Well, that's what we need in today's world.
I know.
We appreciate each of you. Thank you for being on, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.